Let me begin, without further ado, by explaining that I was born in a little village in Transylvania. Nobody knows about that unless they've heard of Dracula. But it was a little village. The house had no water, no lights. It didn't even have television. And the family, consisting of my mother, father, and a sister, and myself, had been subjected to persecution and poverty. And the only thing we could do would be to get out of there as soon as possible. The nations were changing nationalities. My sister was born in Hungary. I was born in the same bed. They called it Romania. So there was turmoil following the First World War. We landed by taking a small ship across the Atlantic Ocean in December. We traveled third class because there was no fourth class. The voyage itself was very perilous. My grandmother, who followed shortly after us, died of pneumonia on the ship. When we landed in New York, we were lucky to find someone who offered us shelter. If my father would become a janitor for an apartment house, a tenement house, we would be allowed to sleep and live in the cellar. And that's where my life in America began. My memory begins in a dank cellar in a place called Hell's Kitchen in New York, which was a high-density crime area. I won't bore you with the details. We lived in poverty. I lived in poverty most of my life. But I had the courage to go to a good school. I applied for admission to the Harvard Law School and was accepted and given a scholarship for my exam on criminal law. I was still in law school when the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor occurred. Everybody I knew went down to enlist. It took me a while because I was very short, about 5 feet tall. And eventually I did enlist in the Army as a private in the artillery. I was sent to Europe in that capacity to join in the landing at Normandy or the invasion of France. I remember very well, since this is a British broadcast, the British sailors were in charge of the landing craft. And as I jumped out into the water, for most of the soldiers, the water went up to their ankles. For me, it went up to my knee. And the British sailor slapped me on the back and he said, "That's the way to Berlin, Yank. Good luck." And that was my return to Europe. I won't go into the details of war itself. That's been adequately described elsewhere. I can only tell you the conclusion: war is hell. And I went through it. Not merely the landing on Normandy Beach, where by that time there were dead soldiers, American soldiers in uniform, floating face down in the water, tanks mired in the sand, the Germans waiting a short distance away to counterattack. I crossed the Rhine on a pontoon bridge in a Jeep. I participated in every major battle till the final Battle of the Bulge. And the most interesting thing for my entire war experience was the horrors that I personally witnessed on assignment from General Patton's headquarters to go into the concentration camps as they were being liberated and collect evidence of the crimes so that the offenders, the perpetrators, could be held to account in a court of law, which was intended at that time. And I need not describe in detail the concentration camps. I have difficulty in doing so. Bodies lying on the ground, you couldn't tell if they were dead or alive, eyes pleading for help, stacks of what had been humans piled up, looking like stacks of bones before the crematoria, waiting to be burned. every possible disease, typhus, rats, lice, dysentery. The idea was to get in, get the evidence, and get out as fast as you can, and move on to the next camp. And that's what I did, moving from camp to camp, from Buchenwald, which was the first camp, to Mauthausen, to Flossenburg, to a host of camps, where the circumstances were all rather the same. Horror is the only word to describe it. Human beings who had turned into animals, behaving like rats, climbing into a pile of rubble and garbage, trying to find some morsel of bread or food that would help diminish some of their starvation. So that all of this I saw at very close hand, and of course it had made an indelible impression on me. When the war was over, all I wanted to do was to go home and resume a normal life. I never wanted to go back to Germany. I came back to the States with about 10 million soldiers looking for a job. I had been admitted to the bar before I entered the Army. One day I got a telegram from the Pentagon. Dear sir, they had never called me sir before. I went. They wanted to talk to me about a job. They wanted to send me back to Germany to help with the military commissions, which I had worked on in my days as a soldier, as at that time a corporal or a sergeant of infantry. They wanted me to go back to help them set up these military commission trials, which were to take place in Munich. And these have been all but forgotten. While we were discussing that possibility, and I was refusing to go back into military service unless we declared war on Germany again and were losing, the military and I didn't quite see eye to eye. I made it a point not to obey any order that I knew was illegal or stupid. And so very often I was in hot water with the Army bureaucracy. In any case, I was hired then by a man who was then General Telford Taylor. Later, we became law partners in New York. He was in charge, appointed by President Truman, to conduct 12 additional trials in Nuremberg. And the purpose of those trials was to paint a broader picture of German life. And it was not just a snapshot of Hermann Goering and Goebbels and other people in the first International Military Tribunal trial in Nuremberg, but to see how it was possible for a country like Germany, a civilized country, to not only engage in these atrocities, but to cheer them and encourage them. How was it possible? So we wanted to have a trial of the doctors who performed medical experiments, the lawyers and judges who perverted the law. That was the subject of a film, Judgment at Nuremberg. The generals, the members of the SS, the stormtroopers who were doing the actual murdering, the army themselves, the diplomats themselves, and the industrialists who built the concentration camps. They provided the funds for them in order to have free labor. And the people working there were being literally worked to death. And so I went back to Germany. And General Taylor, who was in charge of the 12 trials, said, look, Ben, you know all about Germany, about concentration camps. You were collecting evidence of that. We have suspects, but we need the evidence to convict them. If we have only a suspect and no evidence, we have no case. If you have the evidence but no suspect in custody, we have no case. So my job was to find enough convicting evidence to hold the people we had as suspects in Nuremberg. I went to Berlin, set up a staff of about 50 people, and there we combed through the ruins of the various German officers, the SS, the foreign ministries, etc. And we found a batch of reports from the Eastern Front, top secret, of course, all in German, sent to Berlin where they were consolidated. And these were reports of a very nondescript outfit called Einsatzgruppen. Einsatz in Germany means action. Gruppen, it means groups. And it was deliberately nondescript because they didn't want anyone to know what their assignment was. Their assignment, very simple, was to go in behind the German lines and kill. They never used the word kill, they said eliminate or something like that. Every single Jewish man, woman, and child they could lay their hands on. Do the same thing for the gypsies, do the same thing for anybody else who might be perceived as a threat or future threat to Germany. I went to Berlin. I had these documents. I flew with them with a sampling down to Nuremberg. And I said to General Taylor, we have to put on a new trial. He said, we can't. Cases have all been assigned. All the lawyers have been assigned. The Pentagon is not keen on these trials to begin with. I'll never get approval for it. And I was outraged and said, we cannot let these mass murderers go free. I have in my hand mass murder on a scale never before seen in human history, and we cannot just walk away from it. He said, can you do this in addition to your other work? And I said, sure. Okay, he said, then you do it. And so I was appointed and became the chief prosecutor of what was known as the Einsatzgruppen case. I accused the 22 defendants of murdering in cold blood over 1 million people, including thousands of children shot one shot at a time. I was then 27 years old. It was my first case. The difficult thing for me was to decide what penalty do I ask for. How do you balance in the scale of justice the calculated murder of 1 million people, innocent people, with the lives of 22 selected defendants out of 3,000 who every day did these killings for about a 2-year period? And I concluded that to just ask for the death penalty would be totally inadequate to match the severity of the crime. And instead of that, I asked the court to affirm by international criminal law the right of all human beings to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or creed, because these people were murdered simply because they didn't share the race, creed, or ideology of their executioners. And I thought that was quite horrible. And if we could get a rule of law, I was already a lawyer and I was always interested in law. If we could get a rule of law which would protect humankind against such future atrocities, that would be more significant than anything we did with these selected handful of murderers. The judgment of the court found all of the defendants guilty. 13 of them were sentenced to death, and of course reaffirmed my plea for the entitlement of all human beings to live in peace and dignity, regardless of their race or creed. It was my plea for humanity, a plea of humanity to law, and that has never left me. When the trials were over, I recognized there was more to this punishing a handful of defendants. We have to do something for the victims as well. And I worked on creating a new precedents in the law. It took a lot of bold action and bold thinking to say the fact that it never existed before is irrelevant. If you do harm to a person illegally, you have a duty, morally as well as legally, to try to compensate and undo the harm. And I set up all the restitution programs for all the Nazi victims, regardless of race or creed, to get compensation from Germany, West Germany. That program is continuing to this day. That was another thing. But the most important thing, the most important by far, is to prevent it from happening again. And everybody says, Ben, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to stop war making? And the answer is yes, I am trying to stop war making. Because the current system, whereby if two heads of state are unable to agree, they take young people like all of you and send them out to kill other young people they don't even know, who may have done them no harm. And when they get tired of killing each other, they rest for a while, declare victory, then they start again killing each other. That's the current system. It's plain crazy. And the money that they need to take care of the students and pay their obligations, to take care of the refugees, to take care of the poor, and the medical requirements of the aged, it's wasted on armaments. Today, We can kill everybody from cyberspace. Nuclear weapons are already obsolete. From cyberspace, we can cut off the electrical grid on planet Earth, which means if they want to cut off the electrical grid for London, easy, just shut it off. What happens to the people in London or any other state or country? Whether they'll be dead in a week or two is the issue. So that's the world in which we live. You are in a very dangerous condition today, much more so than ever before. I'm not concerned with my welfare. I am concerned with yours. So I want to say, since my time here is limited, soon this torch will drop from my hands. I know that someone else will pick it up. To whoever people that may be, and there will be more than one, I hope and know it will be, run with it as far as you can. It's possible to do the impossible. We see it from cyberspace today. We see it from the emancipation of women. We see it from same-sex marriages. This is impossible a few years ago. Today it's a reality. But we can do the impossible. What's so impossible about stopping war making when you're spending all your money on trying to kill more people instead of trying to help them? So I think that when this torch drops from my hand, someone will pick it up and run with it. If they can't run, they'll walk with it. It'll take a while. If they can't walk, they'll crawl with it. But we are moving forward. We have an international criminal court. We are beginning to create effective laws. We have not yet come to the enforcement problem, which is vital, but we are working on it. And there has been an awakening of the human conscience as a result, largely, of the Nuremberg trials. And it's that what you have to build upon. So I say to all of you, do not despair. Be bold in your thinking and your acting. Don't assume that anything is impossible. Do what you know is right. And if you do, I know you'll have a happier life than I have had. Thank you very much.